It's great to be here and be able to tell our story. Before I do, I'm Hitesh. I lead the analytics division in Intergamma. How many of you know the company Intergamma? Show of hands. That's so many. I hope I have some new facts to share with you in the context slide, because I really want to be able to tell you about the company as well. Also, just to get to know you a little bit, I lead the analytics division from the spectrum from BI to AI, so I'm responsible for the whole thing within Intergamma, and I was allowed to actually build that, well, more or less from scratch when you talk about the data cloud. How many people do we have in here that are data engineers, data scientists, are doing the groundwork? How many? Okay, that's a couple. How many here are in a managerial position? That's a couple as well. I'm wondering what the rest is doing. How many of us have any experience with Snowflake prior to this event? That's quite a few as well. That's actually half of you. This is going to be an interesting talk, because I'm going to be just as interested in hearing your stories as you are to hear mine. Let's jump right in and talk about the company first before we move into the content. Intergamma consists of 3 formulas. I don't know if all of you were aware, but there's Gamma Netherlands, there's Gamma Belgium, and there's Karwei. In total, in 2020, our revenue was 1.7 billion. And there's some context to sketch there, because a couple of years ago, we were merely a franchiser. And since then, we've actually gone through an acquisition and become a full-blown retailer. We are now the number 3 retailer in the Benelux region in the non-food industry. I now have 10,000 colleagues instead of the 400 that we have in HQ. We have those colleagues spread across 389 stores. And those 389 stores, they add up to a total sales floor area of 1.1 million square meters. And for those of you, any football players in the hall, for those of you that know football a little bit, this is 225 football fields, roughly. That's how many fields. Imagine running that. That's about Intergamma. We started off our journey in July. Well, when I talk about myself and Intergamma, we started off our journey on the 1st of July, 2020. That's a couple of months into COVID. And when I first came in, there was a status quo that we had to work with, that we were working with at that time. Our data partner has always been, well, for the last 13 years, Energy. Energy is in the hall as well. And this is how it looked back then when we first came in. And a brief explanation, on the left you see all our sources. That's where the data is coming from. We have an extraction engine that's already across the dotted line, which means that's the responsibility of Energy. That's where they take over. They extract that data, they ensure that it's ingested into Netezza. Once it's ingested, it enters the data staging area. And between the data staging area and the data warehouse is where we have all our transformations. That's where we add all the business logic. Now, the way that works, it's basically just SQL. So it's always been ELT, and it's orchestrated in Pentaho. And then at the end of the whole ride, you see that there's not a dotted line, but a line, which states that it's no longer Energy responsibility, and the dotted line states that it's still served by Energy, so it's on their servers. And you see that the consumption side of things, that's our responsibility. That's what Intergamma did, right? And we consumed mostly through reporting, so there's a lot of reporting going on there. We used SAP Business Objects for reporting, and I think there were a couple of problems here. We consumed at several different layers, but there are a couple of problems with this model. When you talk about the technology, because that's what I'm here to talk about now, I was hired to take care of people, process, and technology. But today we're going to talk about the technology part. So if you have any questions about the other two, we can address it at the panel as well. But on the technology side of things, the biggest challenge here, if you talk about it, is this Netezza instance that was on-premise. It was hosted on an on-prem data center, where a lot of other clients of Energy's were hosted as well, and it wasn't, by default, scalable, right? There was no way to scale out of what you had at that point. So if we were to allow access to the data for analysts, for example, and something were to go wrong, we weren't going to be affecting only our environment. we're talking about how many clients does Energy have? I don't know. On this platform. About 10 still. So you can imagine we don't want that on our minds. And well, Energy didn't want that either. So couple of challenges we were facing with the situation back then, right? I mean, on the left hand, lack of transparency. When you talked to the business at the time, the business actually didn't know. They didn't have a clue of where the data was. They didn't know how much data was available. They didn't know what was available in terms of the content, the business content, like what can I ask for? So they also couldn't engage in conversation about, what's the low-hanging fruit? Like what is already there that you can help me with and what's not there yet, So they can't actually engage in conversation. So there's some difficulties in stakeholder conversations there as well. Another problem was access to data. I mentioned that already. We have a bunch of analysts that should be able to work with data because they have SQL skills, but we weren't able to provide them the necessary access. And when I say SQL skills, I'm not saying they're professional data engineers, because if we had those, then Energy was very compliant and helped get them access. But when you talk about your business analysts that do know SQL but are not aware of what they could potentially cause in terms of damage, you want to be able to provide them access. But in this platform, that wouldn't be the case, right? You don't want that. So that's the access to data issue. And that's only on the human level. There's also obviously applications that want live query data, where you also ideally would like to serve that from the warehouse, which is also not something that was possible with this platform. With this platform, we would have to work with nightly batches and have to schedule how much pressure, if you will, we put on the system. Then there's the performance versus innovation problem or dilemma, I would call it. I don't know. See, the thing is, what I've noticed is when I see data engineers working and they have to wait hour and a half, 2 hours for a query to execute, it slows down not just their progress, but also their ability to innovate. They're just, by the time the 1.5 hours is done, they forgot the idea they initially started with. That's a major drawback when you're trying to move forward. You want them to be able to remain agile. You want them to be able to think of the next step while they're executing the query so that they can continue on their work. And that's the third problem that really held us back at that time. We spoke about the challenges, and I'm taking a huge leap here because obviously I came in July 2020, but this whole process to get to this picture, this took some time. I think we took 9 to 10 months to actually get to this picture. It could have been a lot easier because this was Energy's advice from the start, but we didn't trust them. So here's what we did, right? We went back to the drawing table. We said, you know what? Energy is our data partner. There's no way that they're unbiased, right? So we went to Axions. I think they're in the room as well. We went to Axions and we went to Go Data Driven because we wanted representation for the data science side of things. And then we went through an entire process of about 3-4 months, an entire research based on our criteria, which system was going to suit us best and what the architecture would look like. Little did we know, at the end of those 3-4 months, we got the same picture that Energy presented us with. So that was this picture. Essentially, I have reoriented the picture. So the sources are down below. And you see, the overall impression, I don't know if that's true for you guys as well, the overall impression is that there's actually a sense of simplification here. Everything looked very complex before. We had multiple streams, there were problems and workarounds. This looks way simpler, right? The other thing, I don't know if you guys noticed that, but we had 2 layers before. It was a 2-layer data warehouse where we had the data staging area and the actual warehouse. And we've introduced an additional layer here, the 3rd layer, the information layer. And that's something that's very, very typical in the Snowflake scenario because we would not have introduced that necessarily on any other platform. And that's, I think, what Ruben was referring to earlier. We only have the data in the data area and the business area. The information area differs per application or per type of application and consists of views. So we're not paying for additional storage, we're only paying for the compute, which is essentially the same as querying on the business area. You wouldn't pay that much more. So this is why this becomes extremely convenient. There's not much additional cost involved, but you can actually now, specifically customize a particular information layer to your app, right? Or in this case, we're going to talk about that in a second, but also to your people. You can also offer a particular information layer to, your analysts, for example. So you can actually offer more means in a controlled manner. What you see up here, SAP Business Objects is still on the picture. We don't want to phase that out without having provided the comfort and confidence to the business that everything works in the new world the way that they're used to it working in the past. Now, I'm saying the way that it used to work because change in itself is a process, right? I mean, people have they get up and they look at their reports at 8:30 in the morning, 8 in the morning, and if it becomes a dashboard, it's going to have to change the way they work with it, right? It asks something of them as well. So we have decided to not phase anything out until everybody has said confidently that they want to move to the new platform because of the added value. That's what we're doing. On the dashboard side, we've introduced Tableau, and that's going swell, that's going really good. ThoughtSpot is grayed out here, and it's important to mention because we're not a customer of ThoughtSpot. We haven't actually gone ahead and done anything with it yet, other than, and this is what's really interesting, we actually ran a demo with them. We're not even properly live in production with Snowflake yet, and we already did a demo with ThoughtSpot on a very crucial domain, price and promotion. And we displayed that to approximately, I think there were almost 200 people in the call. And out of those 200 people, so that's half our organization, right? That's half HQ out of those 400. We had 200 in the call. After that call, I had 30 messages on chat and about 50 or 60 emails of people saying, I want ThoughtSpot now. They went crazy. I felt like Steve Jobs just introduced the iPhone. That's how crazy it was. And the reason I'm mentioning that here, we're here for Snowflake. The reason I'm mentioning that here is because, in my opinion, there's no better way for you to experience the full extent, or at least your business users, the full extent of what Snowflake is capable of doing, other than moving ahead with ThoughtSpot. How many of you know ThoughtSpot or have experience with ThoughtSpot? Any of you have actual experience? Have you seen it in action? How did you experience it? How was it for you?
Easy.
Adoption, key. How was it for you? I saw you put your hand up, I think. Yes.
At Snowflake, so I have to work. I want to know what it is. I saw demos, played with it a little bit but it's a sandbox, so I loved it. It's pretty easy.
Amazing. Thank you. So essentially, that's exactly how I went into the conversation with ThoughtSpot. That's what happened a couple of months. We were in the middle of the migration, and we said, if Snowflake is what we need, and if lack of transparency is a challenge, what's the radical other side? What does that look like? It looks like radical transparency, right? Sounds like data discovery, sounds like all the things you cannot achieve without artificial intelligence. That's what I thought at first. And it was true, because ThoughtSpot it has an artificially intelligent layer. If you look at ThoughtSpot, you're not going to believe it at first. That's what I did as well. So I said, you know what? I don't believe that what you're showing me is going to work on my data. There's no way. As soon as we had our Christmas milestone in the migration, which was, get the data over to Snowflake and make sure that we have a daily accurate, recent data in it. As soon as we made that target, we asked ThoughtSpot to show us. And it took a week, 2 weeks of investment, and they showed us on that crucial data set that it actually works. And we had people asking questions. We just typed that in the search box, just like Google. And it just showed us the dashboards and all the answers that were in our warehouse. We don't need analysts anymore, right? Right? So that's essentially something I would definitely recommend. If you're working with Snowflake and not yet with ThoughtSpot, just, get into that conversation. On the data science end of things, we have Python, and I have R grayed out because we do offer R for the people who want to use R, but we essentially do everything in Python. And the platform we use there, now we're one step ahead. The platform we use there is Data IQ. And it also helps that we had the conversation with Data IQ and Tableau up front, and they all mentioned that Snowflake was, a perfect fit. They mentioned that it was better than most customers have experienced on other platforms for them specifically. So if you're working with those applications, that's something to keep in mind as well in terms of integration. All in all, on the new architecture, we introduced an analytical workbench. And this is to provide the people with the right access. So we're talking about analysts capable of using SQL. We wanted to provide them with two things essentially, right? And we want them to have read-only access to the warehouse so that they can actually access and work with the single source of truth that you're promoting in the organization. And on the other hand, we wanted them to have an environment in which their personal environment that was isolated, in which they couldn't break the rest of the system, and they could schedule their own flows and also do their own transformation and store their data for their own purposes. We introduced the analytical workbench along with a workplace in Tableau. I'm calling it a workplace because it's nothing more than a folder in which they were allowed to, so everybody was allowed to publish dashboards in decentralized fashion. So instead of the central team developing the dashboards for you and offering a BI platform, you say to everyone, if you're capable of developing a dashboard, you go ahead and do it, but you're responsible, right? Your own credentials, your own data, you're responsible for the contents, you're responsible for who you're offering it to. They cannot come to us, essentially. So there's an ungoverned kind of sandbox environment in which you're providing that to analysts. We coupled those two together because now they would be able to do much more than just upload dashboards and have to upload new Excel files every day. Interacting with the data is an essential one where we had use cases where the collaboration with the business went much further than just code creation. The business had to actually provide input as part of an overall data flow. In this case, the particular use case was our dynamic pricing implementation. So we actually had a happy flow. If everything goes right, we want to automate the entire pricing process. But in the happy flow, there's also elements where people in the business, category management, they would have to say something about the labels that were provided, etc., right? So all of this is information that needs to be fed back to your data to be able to make that happy flow work. This is really difficult if you work with 3-week sprints and you can only release once every sprint, etc., etc. But if you can work with an analyst, that's right side by side with you and is actually implementing the system and working on it right with the business, you can actually make that work in a couple of weeks. And we actually managed to do that, right? And that's something that's crucial. And if you look at it in a broader sense, we're looking at accelerating innovation essentially, instead of making it dependent on a central team and governed processes. Does that make sense? Then there's decentralized automation. I just mentioned that we coupled the workplace in Tableau with the analytical workbench. The reason we did that is because at this point, our analysts are no longer sending across Excel sheets and uploading it to Tableau. What they're doing instead is they have their own queries. They're actually scheduling them on the analytical workbench, and they're introducing that as a data source on Tableau, and they don't have to look at it again unless someone's complaining. Right? I mean, that's a huge difference in their productivity. This is crucial. That's why the growth stat, it says 7 dashboards. And I mean, the first time I wrote that down, I was like, that sounds so lame. But those 7 dashboards, I mean, they're crucial. We have a customer feedback dashboard in there that we didn't create centrally. It came from the business, and now half the organization is using that dashboard. You see? That's exactly what you want, because that would have remained a blind spot for the next few years, maybe, right? You want that. That's value. So that's why I put 7 dashboards on there. Those are not 7 dashboards including what we create centrally. Those are 7 dashboards that were created by the business and are being used. So far, so good, and we are looking at the first results at this point. If we look at, the savings per year, I put them on top, but they're secondary to me, right? I'm not a savings kind of guy. I want to innovate, right? But savings are important to the business, and we saved 183,000 euros a year for the coming years, just on data ops. And this is important to me because less ops means more dev, means more innovation, right? That's how I look at it. It's not less budget, it's more innovation because you have to do less ops. So that's one thing. And the other thing we did with the Christmas milestone, just to make our Christmas a very merry one, we actually executed a mega query on the old environment versus the new environment. And here's the mega query. I mean, we did 40 plus columns, 6.5 million rows and 7 joins. And it took 4 minutes on Snowflake. And on our previous environment, it took 1.5 hours. That's massive. And what do you think? Okay, this is the fun part. We did it again, a second time. How did you think the results compared then? Tricky question. What did you say? 2 minutes. No. 0.8 seconds. Cache. Exactly. We didn't have that. So the second time we did it it was 1.5 hours again. Surprise, surprise, right? I mean, this to me, this is why I do it, right? I mean, this is where it sounds very technical and everything, but this is what enables innovation. Moving forward, I mean, this is only, like I said, we just started off our journey. So moving forward, this is what we have aligned. And again, this is, read this in the context of this is technology. So we're not talking about the people in the process, the community building, and all the other things we're doing. But on the technology front, the first thing we're going to do is invest as much as we can on the BI portal, on the information portal, to get that value add and get people off the legacy systems. After that, we're going to be introducing a technical data catalog. And we're going to start filling it from our central team, so not yet involving the business, but we're going to fill it in our own pace. After that, we introduce a method of data discovery, and this is why we do that, before we introduce data governance. Essentially, when you request change from the business, I've noticed people are much more willing to change something if they experience the pain point. And if you show them that there's so much data, of which 70% has not yet been well defined, then they'll start feeling the pain. Until you show them that, until there's any interface, it's still a black box, right? They don't know how big the pain is. Why would they move? Why would they provide you with the definitions? Why new processes? Why new responsibilities? Why are we doing this? It starts with data discovery. Just show them how empty it is. Right? And then you have a different conversation, because now you want to use it. You want to be able to use the data discovery platform, but it's empty. And then we start the conversation on data governance, and we actually get their change voluntarily. So this is the order in which we intend to do things for the coming 1 to 2 years. Thank you.